There is a moment, right before everything shifts, when life feels strangely unfamiliar. A quiet uncertainty appears in the spaces where clarity used to live. And if you're watching this now, it's because some part of you is standing at that invisible edge. You can feel something moving inside you, even if you can't name it. Something is dissolving, loosening, untying itself from the version of you that can no longer continue. And I want you to breathe with that for a moment. Not to fix it, not to interpret it. Simply to feel how a new state begins whispering long before it becomes visible. Neville used to say that every state has a life cycle. It is born, it grows, it matures, and eventually, it dies. That death doesn't announce itself with clarity. It arrives through disorientation. It arrives through emotional fog. It arrives through the strange sense that what used to make sense suddenly doesn't fit anymore. You are not doing something wrong. You are not moving backward. You are not losing your alignment. You are standing inside the sacred dismantling of who you used to be. Confusion feels threatening because the mind only understands what is familiar. When something new begins forming inside you, the mind reacts to the unfamiliar with an alarm. It labels the unknown as danger, even when that unknown is the doorway to everything you asked for. This is why the confusion feels personal, why it feels like something inside you is slipping. But the truth is gentler than your fear suggests. The confusion is not a problem. It is a sign that the internal architecture that held your old identity in place is beginning to collapse. The thoughts that once defined you are losing their authority. The emotions that once shaped your days are losing their power. The beliefs that once kept you small are dissolving at the root. You're not destabilizing. You're being reorganized. You're not falling apart. Your old self is losing relevance. And just before a system reorganizes at a higher level, it becomes chaotic. Greg Braden often describes this moment of breakdown as the necessary precursor to coherence, a natural, intelligent disarray that clears space for a new pattern to emerge. You are experiencing that same principle within your emotional field. The confusion you feel is coherence shifting, reality being rewritten from within. And because your nervous system has no reference point for this new identity yet, it interprets the expansion as instability. This is why the discomfort feels so immediate and so intimate. You are not regressing. You are expanding into a version of yourself that the old self cannot follow. Take a slow breath. Let the air settle deeper in your chest. Feel what your body is doing right now, in this moment. Notice how it softens when you stop fighting the confusion and begin listening to it. This is not the collapse of your journey. It is the collapse of the identity that could not contain your desire. You are not meant to go back. You are not meant to shrink. You are not meant to remain in a version of yourself that became too small for the magnitude of who you're becoming. So let the confusion be here. Let the fog move through you. Let the disorientation rearrange what you thought you knew, because beneath all of it, a new self is forming, quietly, intelligently, inevitably. And the moment you stop resisting it, you begin to feel the truth beneath the noise. You're not falling out of alignment. You're shedding a state that has finished its purpose. And the confusion you feel right now is the final signal that the old self is dissolving. It is the last tremor before a new identity locks into place. You are standing at the threshold. Stay here with me. Stay here with yourself. Because what comes next is not the collapse of your reality. It is the birth of the one you asked for. There comes a moment in every inner transformation when what once felt solid begins to loosen, not dramatically, not loudly, more like a quiet shift beneath the surface, as if the ground of your identity is subtly rearranging itself. People often mistake this moment for regression. They feel disoriented, unsure of themselves, uncertain about what they once believed with confidence. But this confusion is not a sign that you are going backward. It is the first unmistakable sign that the self you used to be is no longer capable of containing the desires you've chosen to embody. You have stretched beyond the limits of the identity that once protected you, and now its walls are cracking. Even if your mind tries to hold on to the familiar, you can feel the strain. What once fit now feels restrictive. What once made sense now feels incomplete. And confusion rises precisely where this internal mismatch becomes impossible to ignore. There is a principle I call the identity threshold, the moment when your inner world reaches a point of no return, You have outgrown the emotional patterns that once felt like home, even if they were uncomfortable. You have begun imagining new possibilities that the old identity cannot support. You have whispered desires that require a different version of you to exist. Every transformation, no matter how subtle, destabilizes what came before it. This destabilization is not failure. It is the nervous system releasing its grip on an outdated version of safety. The confusion you feel is not a lack of clarity about where you are going. It is the friction produced when the old self tries to stay intact, while the new self rises from within. You are not meant to choose between them. One is naturally collapsing so the other can naturally take its place. And this dissolution often feels like losing direction. You stop resonating with old goals. Old motivations lose their spark. Old coping mechanisms don't work the same way. The internal navigation system that guided your life begins to malfunction because it was designed for a version of you that no longer exists. This is why everything feels unfamiliar. You're navigating a landscape the old self was never meant to enter. Confusion in this light is not chaos, it is rewiring. It is the moment when your consciousness is stripping away the emotional scaffolding that once held your past identity upright. You cannot stabilize a new self while clinging to the structure of the old one. If you look deeper, you'll notice the contradictions inside you. You want abundance, but the part of you that survived scarcity still expects disappointment. You want expansion, but the part of you that relied on smallness still whispers warnings. You want freedom, but the part of you conditioned to predict danger still wants control. These contradictions create the tension you call confusion. Instead of interpreting this tension as a problem, see it as a map. Wherever the contradiction lives, that is exactly where the old identity is losing power. You are shedding a skin that no longer fits, and the stretching, pulling, and discomfort are evidence that the release is already in motion. It feels like taking off a wetsuit that once protected you from the cold. At first, the material clings to your skin. It resists. It gets stuck around your shoulders, your arms, your legs. It feels almost tighter during the moment of removal than it ever did while you were wearing it. But that discomfort is not a sign that you should stop. It is the proof that you're nearly free. The old identity clings because it senses it is no longer needed. The confusion you feel is the final pull before the release, and when it loosens, when it finally slips off, you realize something astonishing. The version of you that felt lost was not losing itself at all. It was being uncovered. There is a subtle moment in the manifestation process when the world around you stops behaving the way it used to. Patterns you relied on begin to blur. Signals you once interpreted clearly suddenly feel mixed, scattered, or contradictory. It can feel as if reality itself is bending, stretching, or vibrating in a way that makes no logical sense. And yet, this is not the universe moving away from you. This is the universe shifting to accommodate the new identity you've begun to embody. The disorientation you feel is the gap between two realities, the one you have outgrown and the one that is forming around the state you have assumed. Your inner world is changing faster than your outer world can keep up, and this misalignment produces the feeling that life has become irregular. What was predictable becomes strange. What was stable becomes uncertain. This is not collapse. This is recalibration. Human beings often expect their manifestations to follow a straight line. A clear intention, a consistent state, predictable signs, steady progress. But inner transformation is not linear. The moment your consciousness reorganizes, your perception reorganizes with it. And when your perception shifts, your interpretation of reality changes as well. This creates temporary irregularities, unexpected emotions, sudden doubts, odd synchronicities, coincidences that feel meaningful but confusing. The mind tries to categorize these experiences using old logic, and when the old logic fails, confusion rises. You interpret the irregularities as obstacles, when in truth they are early indicators that your assumptions are no longer matching your previous timeline. You are not falling off the path, you are shifting timelines altogether. This phenomenon mirrors what scientists call the edge of chaos, a point where any complex system becomes unstable before reorganizing into a higher form of order. Your consciousness is no different. When a new pattern of identity begins to establish itself, the old pattern resists. The two patterns collide, overlap, break apart, and reorganize. This collision does not feel elegant. It feels like mixed emotions, conflicting thoughts, inconsistent results. It feels like the ground beneath you is rearranging itself without warning. But this instability is not the breakdown of your manifestation. It is the breakdown of the perception that belonged to your old self. You are not losing clarity. You are being emptied of the interpretation that no longer fits who you are becoming. If you pay attention, you will notice signs that reality is bending toward your new state, coincidences appearing in strange clusters, unexpected delays that lead to meaningful encounters, people behaving differently around you without any clear reason, moments where you sense something shifting, even if you can't pinpoint what it is. They feel confusing, only because they don't follow the emotional logic of your past identity. You are being guided by signals intended for the version of you that is emerging, not the one you are leaving behind. These irregularities are the earliest proof that your consciousness has already begun altering the field around you. They are not warnings, they are confirmations dressed in unfamiliarity. It is like adjusting a telescope. The moment you begin shifting the lens, the image blurs. The more precise the adjustment, the more distorted the picture becomes for a brief, uncomfortable moment. Someone unfamiliar with the process might assume that the image is getting worse. But anyone who understands the mechanism knows the truth. The blur means the focus is close. The distortion is the transition. That moment of visual chaos is the bridge between obscurity and clarity. And when the lens locks into place, the image appears sharper than ever before. Your life is that telescope. The blur is not proof that you are off track. It is the sign that reality is seconds away from snapping into alignment with who you have already become. There is a very specific quality to the confusion that arises during inner transformation. It does not come from lack of intelligence or lack of clarity. It comes from a deeper, quieter place that most people rarely take the time to look into. When everything inside you begins to shift, the subconscious reacts first, long before the conscious mind catches up. And the subconscious is deeply loyal to what feels predictable, even if the predictable has been painful, even if the predictable has limited you for years. So when you begin stepping toward a version of yourself that demands expansion, the subconscious interprets that expansion as risk. This is why the confusion feels heavy, foggy, and emotional. It is not that you do not know what you desire. It is that a part of you fears what fulfilling that desire requires you to release. Attachment to predictability is one of the strongest subconscious forces in the human experience. The mind prefers familiar suffering over unfamiliar freedom because familiar suffering can be controlled. You have lived with it. You know how to navigate it. You know its patterns, its texture, its expectations. But freedom requires stepping into a new emotional landscape with no prior map. And because the subconscious is programmed for survival, it attempts to pull you back toward what it already understands. This internal pullback is what you interpret as confusion. It is the voice that says you are not ready, even when you are. It is the hesitation that appears right after a moment of inspiration. It is the doubt that surfaces immediately after you choose a new path. This is not the voice of your true self. It is the voice of the self you are leaving behind. When confusion rises, it is rarely about the situation in front of you. It is about what that situation threatens to transform within you. If stepping forward means letting go of control, the subconscious resists. If choosing expansion requires feeling emotions you have long avoided, the subconscious resists. If embodying a new identity requires dissolving an old pattern of protection, the subconscious resists. And yet that resistance is revealing. It shows you precisely where the old self stored its deepest fears. Not to punish you, not to warn you, but to make visible the points where your transformation is already happening. You are not regressing. You are detoxing from a lifetime of emotional reflexes that once served you but now limit you. There is a quiet clarity hidden underneath the fog, and it becomes visible the moment you stop trying to outrun the confusion. What your mind calls confusion is often the fear of losing control, the fear of being seen, the fear of succeeding in a way that demands more of your truth, the fear of stepping into a larger, more expanded version of your life. This fear does not mean the new reality is wrong for you. It means the new reality is right for you but unfamiliar. The subconscious always resists expansion until expansion becomes the new familiar. That is why the emotional turbulence around transformation feels so intense. The old identity is trying to preserve itself, even as you are outgrowing it. Imagine moving a heavy piece of furniture that has been sitting in the same place for years. The moment you begin to shift it, dust rises into the air. Dust you didn't know was there. Dust that has been collecting quietly, out of sight. The movement disrupts what was settled. The air becomes cloudy, and for a moment, the room feels chaotic. But the dust is not a sign that you should stop. It is the proof that something long stagnant is finally being disturbed. Confusion is that dust. It rises when you move the emotional structures that once defined your identity. And as the fog settles, what remains is a space that is ready to be rearranged, renewed and aligned with the self you are now choosing to become. If this message is awakening something inside you, subscribe so you don't lose the insights that help your new identity stabilize. Stay here with what's unfolding. You're closer than you think. There is a moment in every manifestation journey when everything you feel contradicts everything you know. You sense that something is near, yet your emotions behave as if something is slipping away. You feel a strange intensity rising inside you, but you cannot explain why. You experience sudden doubts that do not match your progress. You wake up with an unexplainable tension, as if your inner world is preparing for something your mind has not yet understood. This is the paradox of proximity. The closer you are to the reality you have been assuming, the more the old emotional equilibrium begins to destabilize. It is not the approach of failure. It is the energetic friction created when a new timeline is about to lock into place. And because the subconscious has no experience with this new state, it reacts with confusion right when you are nearest to the breakthrough. Psychologists refer to a phenomenon where emotional intensity increases dramatically near the finish line. It is not because the goal becomes harder. It is because the proximity disrupts the brain's familiar patterns. When your desire was far away, the old identity felt safe. It could postpone, it could fantasize, it could delay change. But when the manifestation moves into your vibrational field, the old identity senses a threat, not a threat to your well-being, but a threat to its own survival. It begins to lose control. It can no longer predict what life will feel like once you cross the threshold. And the loss of predictability triggers nervous system impulses that feel like uncertainty, hesitation, or emotional turbulence. You interpret these impulses as signs that something is wrong, when in truth, they are evidence that you are closer than ever. The mind mistakes proximity for danger because it was designed to maintain what is known, not to welcome what is new. If your new reality promises freedom, abundance, love, or expansion, the old identity experiences this promise as instability. It does not understand how to navigate it. It does not have a script for it. And so as you approach the moment where the new state becomes dominant, the old patterns fire their final attempts to regain control. This internal conflict is often misread as a spiritual setback, but the emotional spikes, the sudden waves of doubt, the moments where nothing makes sense, are the final echoes of the identity that is losing its place in your consciousness. They are the remnants of a self that no longer aligns with your chosen assumption. If you look closely, you will notice a pattern. Your doubts become strongest right after moments of clarity. Your emotional resistance intensifies right after moments of enthusiasm. Your uncertainty rises right after you feel deeply connected to your desire. This is not coincidence, it is proximity. The subconscious is reacting to the approach of a state it cannot control. And the friction between expansion and familiarity produces the confusion you feel. But this confusion is not a sign of misalignment. It is the sign that the old emotional blueprint is collapsing under the weight of your new identity. Think of a runner approaching the final stretch of a long race. The last meters are the most painful, not because the runner is failing, but because the finish line demands everything the body has left. Muscles tremble, breath shortens, vision narrows. Yet the runner is closest to victory at the moment of greatest intensity. The body protests because the end is near, not because the end is unreachable. Your consciousness reacts the same way. Confusion sharpens, emotions intensify, thoughts fluctuate, all because you are approaching the threshold where the old self dissolves and the new self becomes the only truth left standing. There is a very intimate form of confusion that arises when you are evolving faster than your old identity can keep up. It feels like being pulled in two directions at once. One part of you senses the expansion, the clarity, the newness calling you forward. Another part quietly resists, trying to keep you anchored to what once felt safe. This tension is not a flaw in your manifestation. It is the unmistakable sign that two internal selves are negotiating for dominance. One belongs to your past. The other belongs to the reality you have already begun to inhabit, and confusion becomes the sound of this internal negotiation. Human consciousness is not a single voice. It is a field of inner characters shaped by memory, protection, experience, and desire. The self that carries your history is deeply loyal to what it knows. It learned to survive by predicting outcomes, avoiding risks, and repeating what felt familiar. When you begin imagining a new life, one that demands visibility, abundance, or vulnerability, this older self interprets it as danger, not possibility. So it hesitates, it tightens, it whispers doubts at the very moment you feel closest to change. The confusion you experience comes from hearing both voices at once, the voice that wants expansion and the voice that wants control. The emerging self, the one aligned with your desires, is not reckless. It is simply unfamiliar. It carries the vision of who you choose to be, not who you had to be. It speaks in intuition, in quiet certainty, in subtle inner knowing. And even though this new self feels more truthful, the older self has been in charge longer. It will not surrender its role without protest. That protest is what creates sudden waves of resistance, emotional fog, or moments where you inexplicably doubt everything you've already affirmed. This is not regression. It is transition. If you tune into this tension, something becomes clear. The confusion is not telling you to stop. It is revealing that the old emotional system is losing power. You feel torn because the self that once protected you is stepping back, while the self you are becoming is stepping forward. This shift creates internal turbulence, but only temporarily. Imagine a ship with two captains giving different commands. The ship doesn't move smoothly, not because it is broken, but because leadership is changing. Your consciousness works the same way. The wobble you feel is the moment before the new captain, your expanded identity, takes the helm fully. And far from being a signal of failure, that wobble is the clearest sign that the transition is underway. There is a distinct kind of emotional chaos that arises not when you are lost, but when you are aligning. It shows up as intensity that feels disproportionate to your circumstances, reactions that appear out of character, or waves of feeling that arrive without explanation. Most people interpret this turbulence as a sign that they have fallen out of alignment, but the truth is far more subtle and far more encouraging. Before a new state stabilizes, the emotional field that supported the old state must dissolve. This dissolution is not quiet, it is not orderly, it is not graceful. It is disruptive because it is clearing space for a new frequency to become dominant. The chaos you feel is not a malfunction, it is the final unraveling of an identity that can no longer lead your life. In physics, decoherence describes the moment when a system breaks from its old pattern before reorganizing itself into a more refined state. It is the collapse of the outdated structure so that a new structure can emerge. Human consciousness follows the same principle. When you assume a new identity, one of abundance, worthiness, love, expansion, your emotional field begins releasing the feelings, impulses, and reflexes that belong to your previous state. But the release does not feel gentle. It often feels like emotional noise, thoughts racing, mood swings, strange heaviness, unexpected sensitivity. And because the mind prefers continuity, it interprets these signals as instability rather than transformation. If you look more carefully, you will notice that the emotional spikes cluster around the very themes you are stepping into. When you reach for confidence, old insecurities rise. When you reach for abundance, buried beliefs about scarcity surface. When you step into worthiness, forgotten memories of inadequacy reappear. This is not regression. It is coherence breaking. The old frequency is disassembling, so the new frequency can take its place. You are not becoming confused. You are becoming clear. The noise belongs to the part of you that is losing authority, not the part that is emerging. Think of an orchestra moments before a performance. Every musician plays their own notes, tuning their instruments. To an untrained ear, it sounds chaotic, unpleasant, disjointed, uncertain. But that chaos is not the music. It is the preparation for the music. It is the necessary disorder that ensures the beauty that follows will be harmonious. Your emotional field works the same way. The chaos you feel is the tuning process, not the performance. It is the moment right before alignment becomes audible, visible, and embodied. And once the new coherence takes hold, the noise that felt overwhelming will vanish as if it were never there, leaving only the frequency you have chosen to become. There is a kind of confusion that does not come to sabotage you, but to slow you down. It arrives quietly, almost imperceptibly, at the exact moment when you are tempted to slip back into an old pattern. You feel yourself reaching for familiar reactions, familiar fears, familiar stories, and suddenly a fog appears. Your thoughts lose their sharp edges. Your impulses weaken. Your momentum pauses. This pause is not failure. It is protection. The mind introduces confusion when the old identity is trying to reassert itself, interrupting the automatic behaviors that once defined your life. This fog is a buffer, giving your emerging self the space it needs to prevent you from returning to emotional territory you have already begun to outgrow. In psychology, there is a principle that explains this moment. As autonomy increases, old scripts lose their authority. And when an identity script loses power, the psyche enters a temporary instability. You feel it as hesitation, uncertainty, disorientation, not because you lack clarity, but because your consciousness is no longer willing to run the old program. The fog interrupts the reflex, it neutralizes the impulse. It brings you into the present moment so that your next choice is made consciously, not habitually. You interpret this interruption as confusion, but it is actually a sign that your inner system is rewriting itself. What feels like a loss of direction is often the loss of an outdated emotional pattern. That moment, when you no longer know what to think, what to do, or how to interpret your experience, is the moment when your nervous system is refusing to return to its previous default. The old emotional landmarks are fading, but the new ones have not yet formed. The space between them is where the fog lives, and although it feels uncomfortable, it serves a purpose. It keeps you from running back to the identity that once felt necessary, but now feels too small. It holds you still, so the new alignment can take root without being overshadowed by reflexive behaviors. Imagine walking through a mist-covered path. When the fog becomes dense, you naturally slow your steps. You become more deliberate, more attentive, more connected to each movement. The low visibility does not stop your journey. It simply prevents you from rushing. The confusion you feel works the same way. It slows the automatic return to the past. It invites intentionality. It protects the unfolding of the version of you that is emerging. And once the fog lifts, you realize it was never there to block your path. It was there to ensure you did not walk backward. There is a quiet form of confusion that appears when an inner cycle is ending. It does not feel dramatic. It feels like a soft disconnection from what once mattered. You wake up sensing that something no longer fits, yet nothing external has changed enough to justify the feeling. That subtle disorientation is not stagnation. It is the sign that your old reality has exhausted its purpose. The emotional patterns that sustained it are dissolving, and your subconscious is withdrawing energy from the identity you are outgrowing. When a cycle completes, the mind loses its familiar landmarks. What once triggered you loses its charge. What once defined you begins to fade. The emptiness that follows is not loss. It is space being cleared for a new timeline to take shape. It is the stillness before the curtain rises. Confusion is the veil between identities, appearing only when the old world has nothing left to hold you. Confusion becomes strongest at the exact moment a former identity dissolves. Neville taught that every state must die before the next can live, and that death rarely feels orderly. The fog, the emotional spikes, the brief loss of direction, all of it signals that the inner shift has already taken hold. Your system is reorganizing, just as any field does on the edge of a breakthrough. The familiar is losing its grip, and the new state is settling into place. What feels unclear is not resistance. It is transition. Confusion is the thin veil between who you were and who you are now becoming. Stay aligned. Subscribe to awaken the new you.